Hey everyone, Jennifer Lee Chan here from NBC Sports Bay Area. Just got back into LA after being in Santa Clara for the afternoon, talking to assistant coaches or positional coaches. Kind of fun conversations. We don't get to talk to these guys very often. So spoke to Chris Kasarik. He was there and lots of people were around him asking him a lot about Mykel Williams, how he's going to work this defensive front that's new, lots of young guys. And I think the most encouraging thing that he said is that Nick Bosa and Mykel Williams have instantly bonded. Mykel Williams has been acting like a sponge, doing little things that Nick Bosa does, following him around, asking him questions. And Nick Bosa has done a nice job of, being open to sharing techniques and helping him out and really making sure that he feels welcome while also giving him some advice. And, Chris Kasarik didn't say it was anything, he kept it kind of minimal. He said, small little things to help him with his handwork or his footwork or, how to rush the passer a little bit better. So, it's good to hear that the veterans are taking these rookies underneath their wings and helping them out, getting them accustomed to the NFL life. And the same thing is happening for Fred Warner, Nick Martin. Johnny Holland, linebackers coach, said the same thing. Yes, Fred Warner is obviously one of the best linebackers in the game, and he's been taking Nick Martin under his wing as well, making sure that he knows the ropes, and these guys aren't just learning about technique. They're learning how to take care of their bodies, how to make it through a 17-game regular season, maybe into the postseason. So how to study better, how to be in the classroom. Chris Kasarik said, Alfred Collins is still nursing that calf injury, but he's been great in the classroom. He's really learning how to analyze the plays, getting the scheme down. And so, I think it's a good thing. I asked all of the defensive coaches, how has it been with Robert Salah back in defensive coordinator? And they all said, the communication has been smooth. They didn't throw, of course, any of the previous defensive coordinators under the bus, which, can happen. But this group of coaches is really like the locker room. They're not going to say anyone was bad unless it was like Devondre Campbell. Then people are going to come out and say he was awful. Quitting on your teammate is horrible, blah, or on your team is horrible. But generally, it's trickled down from John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. They're good guys. And if, it just didn't work out, and, people outside the building can say awful things about whoever has gone, but this is not a group that will do it. This is not a group of players that will do it. And so the coaches won't do it either. And, I think it's trickled down. So the coaches don't do it. The players don't do it. There's no scapegoat. There's no finger pointing, but they have all said that having Robert Saleh back in the building has been an easy transition. Whereas the other times it might have not been the smoothest transition. So I asked Daniel Bullocks, hey, what's happening with the safety position? It seems like you're very thin with Jair Brown being out, Malik Mustafa being out with an ACL. Jair Brown is out with that ankle procedure. But he said, the guys that they have brought in have been doing a good job. So, he says, he's not worried. He thinks that all of the guys that they've brought in have done a good job, and they're doing a good job within the classroom, and they're doing a good job on the field. When they've been able to make plays, they've been able to make plays. He mentioned Jason Pinnock. That's a guy who I think has been adjusting really quickly to the 49ers scheme. And who else did he say? Jason Pinnock, Richie Grant. So it sounds like Jason Pinnock and Richie Grant. Richie Grant's number 24. Jason Pinnock is number 25. And they were hanging out together last week at OTA. So I'll be watching again tomorrow, which is Wednesday. Who's kind of, with that, who's the first one out of drills? He also did mention Richie Grant and Jalen Mahoney. Those guys have been good. And, George Odom wasn't on the field last week, but maybe he will be this week. But again, Marquise Siegel, Malik Mustafa, and Jair Brown all nursing injuries. So they won't necessarily be out there. But Daniel Bullock said, hey, it's Jason Pinnock's position to be lost, and same with Richie Grant. So those two guys, I think, are the guys that he mentioned first. So I would, I'm going to keep an eye on them for tomorrow. Johnny Holland. Interestingly, Matt Maiocco and I spoke on the podcast about Fred Warner. Is Fred Warner a guy that could end up being, an off the ball stack linebacker that could also become a pass rusher? And I asked Johnny Holland, and he said, yes, that is who he could be. Fred Warner, the league doesn't know it, but he could end up being one of the best off the ball stack linebackers to also rush the passer. let's just put a little bit more on Fred Warner's plate, but in a good way because he can handle it. So interesting there. And yeah, so I actually, those are the three I talked to. Chris Kasarik was obviously very complimentary of the guys that they have. And, the guys that are coming up, CJ West, Alfred Collins, those guys, he said, while it's, I've got a good opinion of them right now, they're checking all the boxes. That's what he said about Mykel Williams. He's checking all the boxes, everything that he learned about him from his coaching staff at Georgia to through the draft process. All the boxes are being checked. But he's like, but we're also in a very toned down situation right now. And we won't know until training camp when they get the pads on, whether that's going to translate to real fun Sunday football. So on the offensive side of the ball, I did speak to Brian Fleury, Chris Furster, and Brian Fleury and Chris Furster both said that Luke Farrell was extremely underrated at Jacksonville. And the fact that he is an incredibly good blocking tight end. And now there is that dichotomy. Do you put him on the field, Luke Farrell or George Kittle, or can you put them both out there at the same time? I mean, that's why they do have Kyle Juszczyk, because they go, with the Kyle Juszczyk and the running back. So maybe they do a little less of that. Maybe they do two tight end sets, but Luke Farrell also can catch passes. Now, he might not be the finesse route runner as much as George Kittle has become one, but they think that he could be. So, it's a way they could scheme up the offense with Luke Farrell out there as well, along with George Kittle, but also giving George Kittle, who's 31, giving him a little bit of a break. But, you don't want to take your best players off the field, and that would be George Kittle. Spoke to Chris Furster about the offensive line, and I think he pretty much said the way the draft fell, the defensive players that they picked were higher on their draft board than the offensive line players that they could have picked at that time. So instead of reach for an offensive lineman, they took the defensive player that was going to contribute more. So as much as he would love to have top draft picks, it is what it is, but the need more was on the defensive line. All the guys that had left during free agency, and then on the offensive line, the one opening that they have, swing tackle and left guard. So they do see Spencer Burford as a swing tackle, as a tackle. So he'll be out there. I did also find out Trent Williams is in the building. So he has reported. And so Chris Furster said was here for the beginning of OTAs, left for a little bit, and he is back. So that is the kind of the big newsy thing of the day for the offensive line. Also spoke to, I didn't speak to Bobby Turner, Matt Maiocco did, but talked to Mick Lombardi a little bit. And I asked him, what does Brock Purdy have to do to take that next step? And he said, just get better every day. And, kind of like what Brock preaches, being where his feet are. But I did ask him, there wasn't really anything surprising there. It's kind of, just get better every day and, kind of those cliche things. But it is true. Be where your feet are. Don't think about practice or the game in 6 weeks. Think about what you have to do in front of you, getting better at each rep. So I asked him, though, I said, Sam Darnold told me that Brock Purdy is excellent at his preparation. And that's really what he learned from Brock Purdy. And I thought that was interesting because, Sam Darnold's been in the league a lot longer. How did Brock Purdy know how to prepare more? And Mick Lombardi said, that's Brock Purdy's thing. He knows how hard it is to learn everything. And part of it was, he's a product of a situation where he was thrown into the starting lineup and, he wasn't playing. So he was studying his playbook in and out while he was the backup. Then, he moved up to, or he was QB3, then he moved it to QB2, was really preparing as if he was going to get in on, under center. And then he was. So the fact that he was prepared made a huge difference in the way he really has to study the playbook and, know the ins and outs of all 22 on the field. And he said, that's what Brock does really well. He understands where everything's supposed to go. And so he can be out there directing traffic. And that's why he's been successful. So tomorrow, Wednesday, another practice. It's the second open practice of OTAs, and then we'll have 2 days of open practice next week. So 4 total practices that are open to media. So I'll be there tomorrow, kind of take a look at the defensive line. who's playing up, stepping up at safety, and we'll see if Trent Williams hits the field. So those are the little news bites from Tuesday 49ers. All right. Hope you all are well. Talk to you soon. Bye.